let's begin our discussion. So last week we talked about this same topic, but from the standpoint of the individual. We were looking at anxiety, as we have been for the past few weeks, and in particular, uncertainty. Uncertainty does cause a lot of anxiety. You're waiting for something to come in the mail, a letter that you need from the IRS, a letter that you need from a school that you've applied to, and you don't know when it's coming, and you don't know what the decision is, and you don't know what's going to happen, and that naturally creates anxiety in people. And last week we talked about how to cope with that on an individual level, which was very nice. And we just said, well, there's uncertainty in life. The Buddha told us about this. Lord Buddha said that we need to be aware of the impermanence of life, that this is not a permanent existence, and that everything is just kind of coming and going. And it's one of the dilemmas of human life. In the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior, Socrates says, you suffer when you don't get what you want. And even when you get exactly what you want, you still suffer because you can't hold on to it forever. So what to do? So we talked about some yogic principles of rasa, of understanding that it is part of our nature to go with the flow and to perceive the cosmic rhythm of the universe and learn to go with the flow. Learn to surrender. Learn to give up our sense of ultimate control and understand that the ultimate control is in the supreme consciousness. So when we surrender to that, we're happier. Now, there's lots of great tips like that, and they're all very good, and we need to learn how to deal with things individually. But we cannot deny the fact that there's so much uncertainty that is created because of the way our society functions. It's not just because of our own mental weaknesses that we suffer from uncertainty, from anxiety. But society creates, I think, the bulk of it. We live here in the United States in a society where if you don't have health insurance, what happens if you get sick? How are you? Think of how people feel that who don't have health insurance. If I get sick, I can't just go to the hospital because the ambulance ride alone can cost $800. One night in the emergency room can cost up to $1,200, and that's probably as much as people's rent for a month. So it's ridiculous how one night at a hospital is the same as, say, a whole month's rent. Plus the treatment, it costs even more. So with all the uncertainty created in our society because of economic insecurity, we often feel not so optimistic about the future. And it's really sad that actually these days, young people, the younger generations, rather than come up into a thriving society with all of the benefits of our the most recent innovations, they are actually facing the most poverty. Student debt, over $1 trillion of student debt combined among all students. That's the highest type of debt in this country. The uncertainty of healthcare, with the debt, not being able to buy homes and things like that. So really, the anxiety and the uncertainty that we feel comes from an external source. And the biggest external source is the society. So today we want to talk about why it is important that society makes systemic changes to create security for people, and that we have a type of societal wellness. And what would those policies look like? What would those economic models look like? Today, we're going to explore a couple of them. And I want to emphasize this again that I've been trying to emphasize all along. And it's a part of our tantric tradition, how we perceive the world and things. You know, it isn't just the individual's responsibility to be, you know, well. It is the society's responsibility to create that for the individual. There's too much pressure on the individual, not enough pressure on the society. There isn't enough pressure to create the proper policies, to elect the right leaders that care about this sort of thing. You know, the society is focused on facilitating things for the rich, for those who are already in power. The society is an instrument to perpetuate their power. And they often demonize those who have other ideas that are more egalitarian. So let's start chatting about something that came up in the last presidential election that I really enjoyed learning a little bit more about. I want to take you now to the town of Dauphin, Manitoba in Canada. In the 1970s, there was an extraordinary government experiment, which you may have heard of, in this small town. The Canadian government decided to test a revolutionary new policy of guaranteed basic income to everyone in this town. This meant that regardless of one's age, gender, or employment status, everyone in the town received what would be considered today about $1,900 per year. The government had been thinking, you know, what could this work? Because, you know, they already try really hard to have a quote unquote welfare state where they provide universal health care and universal access to education. But they thought, what if we just give people money? Shouldn't we just do that? Just give them what they need. And so they tried the experiment like I'm describing here. And the idea was that you provide just enough for people to survive. So in the United States, the poverty line is at around $17,000 a year of income. So to provide, you know, $19,000 a year to the individuals of this town is just putting them slightly over the poverty rate. On top of that, then they build the rest of their lives. But the results of this experiment were fantastic. They were absolutely beautiful. People, one of the things that happened, and they did this for 3 years. The program stopped when power changed in Canada and a more conservative government came in, and they immediately stopped that program. And they also locked up all of the data that was gathered during the experiment. But 30 years later, a woman, Evelyn Forget, she's the author of Basic Income for Canadians, she got access to the data. And among the most remarkable things that she discovered was that the high school completion rates of the town went up. Because before, high school kids would drop out to get jobs so that they can help support their families. But when they had this income available to them, they stayed in school. Parents spent more time with their children. Mothers and fathers took off more time than the parental leaves, you know, allowed. They spent more time with their infant children. The birth weight of the children that were born, low birth weight also declined because mothers were taking care of themselves more thanks to the new income. And what's really significant is that the levels of physical and mental health, um, the mental health did not decline. You know, there was a drop an 8% in hospitalizations and health problems, which included a significant decrease in anxiety. There was a significant decrease in anxiety and depression. So that is really, really fantastic information about UBI, Universal Basic Income. And in the last presidential election, we had this totally new candidate, Andrew Yang, who was advocating for this. He was suggesting to provide to all Americans $1,000 guaranteed per month. Not a bad idea when you look at the data, when you look at all the scientific evidence that shows how much it can improve people's lives. And when they asked Andrew Yang, they said, well, isn't this going to make people lazier? And isn't this, the typical stuff that people react to this kind of thing? I really enjoyed Andrew Yang's responses. Because, kind of mirroring what the subject said, he basically said, the money would go to daycare. It would go to car repairs, to Little League signups, to local nonprofits. And then those organizations end up hiring new people. And it's kind of like a trickle-up effect rather than the trickle-down economics that we've been forced to believe works. So it just, another thing that people said in Canada when they reflect back on it, when Evelyn Forget did the study, a woman said, for once in my life, it just meant that I could have, some cream in the coffee. And it just gives security. It just provides security. It takes away the edge of the uncertainty that we experience in life all the time because of economic hardship. One day that has to be dispelled from our lives. So, yes, there's a lot of great evidence that shows that UBI would be great to have, universal basic income. Now I want to talk to you about another policy. And feel free to start putting in your comments in the chat. I want to talk to you about something that I've been advocating for a long time, and that is Prout. And you may have seen my up-and-coming channel that's been sort of inactive lately, Prout Rev. So Prout is the Progressive Utilization Theory. And one of the biggest, and it's a socioeconomic alternative to capitalism and communism. And one of the important tenets of Prout is economic democracy, and in particular, cooperatives. So what is a cooperative? And here I'm just showing you an example of a bicycle cooperative that I talked about once here too during our meditation talks of this cooperative in Baltimore called Baltimore Bicycle Works. A cooperative is one way that society can guarantee employment to all. So, there's kind of I think it's a fair debate. Should we have universal basic income, or should we just guarantee everybody a job so they can have income? And I posted this on my Instagram, and I got a really good comment from somebody that said, well, I prefer UBI because if there is guaranteed employment, it doesn't guarantee that employment won't exploit the workers. So I'd rather have the free money. And that's a very important concept to be aware of. The guaranteed employment in Prout can come from not setting up more corporations, but setting up cooperatives in the society. So a cooperative is a business that is worker-owned. Every employee of the company is also an owner and is an equal shareholder in the company's quote-unquote profits. Um, I say quote unquote profits because recently I was reflecting on some of Karl Marx's philosophy, where Karl Marx actually believed that um, the word profit is really just another word for exploitation, but it's dressed up in a really nice way to make it sound like something really, really like um, with a lot of, dignity. uh, but really, profit is just like, and when we're talking about a big company, for example, how much can I avoid cutting costs, keeping wages down, just so that I can make more money. And there's the glorified term for almost this type of, in a way, a type of theft to the workers is called profit. But a cooperative is different. A cooperative is when all of the workers own part of the company. And there is actually now some growing evidence about how effective cooperatives are. According to the International Cooperative Alliance, which was established, believe it or not, in 1895, today cooperative members represent at least 12% of humanity, and there are 3 million cooperatives currently established, like the one in Baltimore that I just mentioned, which I told their story on another session, the Baltimore Bicycle Works. Cooperatives are, instead of corporations or other privately owned businesses, they actually have a longer lifespan because 60 to 80% of all new businesses that open in the United States fail in their first year. And I know what that's like. I've started businesses before. I also started a business with my family, and it didn't last more than less than a year, I think, maybe a year. So businesses have, unfortunately, a high mortality factor. And on the other hand, only 10% of cooperatives fall in their first year. So that is truly, truly significant. I wish that in all of whatever business endeavors I have, that I can start some kind of cooperative. Because, a cooperative is more than just, it's more than just starting a business. It's about having job security. It's about being in a community. It's about providing dignity to workers and sharing wealth and making, collaborative decisions. And right now, we live in a society, like I said, that is all about corporations. But in the future, I have a feeling, as I am an optimist of the future, as I'm sure you are too, all yogis usually are, in the future, we will have cooperatives and we will finally have economic democracy. Because democracy works best, the smaller the groups are that are trying to exercise it. So if you have democracy in the workplace, democracy in your families, democracy in your local communities, where everybody has a voice, can express their opinion, everybody's opinion is considered, then sometimes it's harder to facilitate groups like that. But in the end, the longevity of those groups is longer than when just individual people make decisions on behalf of others. Those groups will tend to splinter faster. So, if we really want democracy here in the United States or everywhere in the world, we need to realize that this political democracy that we have is just sometimes an instrument to fool the people. Sometimes democracy makes it look like, oh, this society is fair and just because people can vote. But if they're only voting for political figures, they're not voting over the laws that determine their economic status, or not voting on economic decisions, then there's a lot of room for exploitation. So in a cooperative, you have democracy and the workers can vote on how much they should pay themselves, how much they should put aside for the investment. Nobody's going to vote to lay themselves off, right? So you have a lot of security. And that's what we're talking about today, is systemic security, policy-wide security. And I think both of these, either UBI or cooperatives, are great options. Of course, I'm a Proutist, so I have a bias toward the cooperatives. I believe that if we set up cooperatives, they will help to guarantee employment, but also these cooperatives ideally can also be established to help provide basic necessities for people. So cooperatives of growing food, providing healthcare, providing shelter, providing clothing. One of the most famous cooperatives is I forget the name. In the 1960s, in the United States, there were the women of Mississippi, I believe, who created the quilts. Those quilts are now famous. They're in museums. One time, this anthropologist went there and saw these amazing quilts being hung to dry, and they said, "Who made these?" "The local women of this town make these." Oh my God! You women could make a fortune selling these," he said. And they were like, "Yeah, but guess what? They didn't all start their own business. They started a cooperative. And all of the women worked together to sell their quilts. And they made a lot of money. And what do you think those women did with the money? They improved the lives of their children. They improved the life of their own lives. They got the whole town out of poverty. No joke. I just can't remember the exact name of the women's quilt cooperative in Mississippi, I believe. So, if it's not Mississippi, it's Alabama. It's in the deep South. So these are wonderful stories, and they are things that we should consider as yogis, as people interested in personal development, that we don't just want the well-being, we don't want all the pressure on the individual. We need to provide things take off the pressure and let society, let the government, let our institutions provide wellness for the people, okay, through sound economic models that help to distribute wealth. Now, let's hear from your comments. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this topic. Thank you for listening. Karen says, "I love these ideas you've presented today. I hope that through this pandemic society, we will now change to care more about the individual needs to thrive rather than corporations. If folks have basic needs provided, they will thrive, be more productive and secure to become better individuals, therefore a better society. So be it." Exactly. Why can't we have these things? Why do we believe that these things are utopian illusions? They are not. Remember, you may remember, you'll know this in your lifetime. Nobody thought there was going to be a black president in the United States. Nobody thought they would see that in their lifetime. Those of us who are been alive for long enough to say that. Nobody thought we would have gay marriage. Nobody thought that one day at the White House, they would light up the White House in rainbow colors to show solidarity with gay people. That was not supposed to be part of the plan. Nobody expected that, but it happened. Back in the day, people also, they never thought slavery would end. And it did, thanks to a bloody war. That's why the Civil War, in many cases, should be called the Revolutionary War, because it was the most such a revolutionary period in world history, where you had white people dying so that black people could be free. And those white people paid the cost of imposing slavery. But these things were considered illusions. But they're considered illusions until they are done. And one day we can have a society where there's more cooperatives than corporations, and even things like UBI could be put in place. So thank you, Jake. Oh, before I get to Jake's comment, I hear Kayla here. Single women with kids are especially suffering during the pandemic. And thank you for bringing up the pandemic, because that's we are all going through a moment of anxiety, uncertainty through this pandemic. Through this pandemic, we've had, I think, over 10 million cases that are just rising every day. Not only do we have the uncertainty of, am I going to get the virus? Is my family going to get the virus? Am I going to die from this virus? But the uncertainty of the economic collapse that we've had back in April. Unemployment went up to 14%, which is a record high in American history. And I'm sure either you or friends even my family experienced economic hardship, uncertainty. And I can see how it affects my family members, how depressed they get. And of course the government delays in giving the aid and providing more money for unemployment. But so we're going through a period of collective uncertainty, and we can now really value how important it is to have collective certainty through big economic changes. And Jake says, the Freedom Quilting Bee. Exactly. Thank you, brother. That is the name of that famous cooperative that I was talking about earlier. Okay, and now those women's quilts are in museums.